So a lot of people have been asking for full power versions of the decks that I build, and while I would prefer to stick to doing $15 decks for people or other budget decks because I want people to have access to those very easy to build, very strong, very fun decks they can play at their LGS and get into Commander, get into third places, help their mental health by having something that is consistent and good that can get them into games of Magic where they can meet people and have fun and do all that other fun stuff. I do recognize that people are wanting to see full power versions of decks, so maybe once a week or so, I'll go ahead and make a full power version of one of the decks that I have done a video on. This will be a deck that will operate with a much higher budget. It will not run things like dual lands and, you know, cards that are on the restricted list. It's not going to be any of that kind of shenanigans, so don't expect me to build like the Sliv Elves deck with the Gaia's Cradle in the mana base. These are full power in terms of what would be acceptable at most casual tables. So you're not going to see dual lands, you're not going to see Gaia's Cradle, you're not going to see any of that stuff, but you are going to see a very high power. You're also going to see a very high budget. The deck we're going to be talking about today is my personal favorite of any of the decks that I have ever built in my time playing Magic. This is my favorite deck to play anytime I have a chance to run her in a game. I will. This is Sefris of the Hidden Ways. And unfortunately, as good as Sefris is, as much as I love her, my version of the deck clocks in at about $444. This is one of the reasons I don't want to show my versions of these decks that I run at full power. I prefer showing the ones that people have access to, because nobody should be paying a PlayStation 5's worth of money for cardboard so that they can enjoy playing a game with their friends. But if you guys really do want to see full power versions of decks, sure, why not? Let's go ahead and begin with this. This will be a test run. If you guys like it, then absolutely I will go ahead and do more content like this on top of the $15 builds. But as a primer, for those who don't know, Sefris is a dungeon commander. This means that she has an ability that interacts directly with the dungeon. And what is the dungeon? Well, it is this mechanic right here. Anytime you activate a card that says you go into the dungeon, you choose one of these 3 dungeons, and you will enter one. So say you say, I'm going to go into the Lost Mines of Candelver. Okay, cool. You go into the Lost Mines of Candelver, you're going to scry 1, and then every single time you go into the dungeon, you will go further into the one you choose. You cannot choose a different dungeon after you've chosen your initial one. Only you can go into a different dungeon if you have completed the one you're in. So you must leave the one you're in first. You can't go backwards through the dungeon. You must always follow the arrows. So you get to scry 1. Next time you go into the dungeon, you can choose to either go into the mine tunnels or the goblin lair. The goblin lair will generate you a token. The mine tunnels will generate you a treasure token. After that, you can only go into, again, the side you've chosen. So mine tunnels can go into dark pools or fungi cavern, and the goblin lair can go into the storeroom or the dark pool. But all of them will end in the same place, the Temple of Dumathoin, which lets you draw a card. So the point of a deck like this is to go through the dungeon repeatedly and get the benefits of the dungeon. For our purposes, that's usually going to be Lost Mines of Fendelver. We get a scry out of it, a treasure token out of it, we burn everybody for 1 and gain a life out of it, and then we draw a card out of it, which is not a whole lot of advantage when you think of the amount of work we have to do for each one of those, but I can assure you, this deck does a lot of work in terms of getting through that dungeon at lightning speed. Now, if you are playing a dungeon deck, there is one other deck or one other mechanic you need to know about, and that is the Undercity. If you have a card that says you go and take the initiative, that takes you through the Undercity instead of the dungeon. If you're already in a dungeon, the initiative will drive you through the Undercity. The initiative will drive you through whatever dungeon you're in, is what I mean to say. You'll go through whatever dungeon you are currently in if you have the initiative, but if the initiative is the thing you get the first time you go into a dungeon, you can only go into the Undercity. So if you don't want to be in the Undercity because it is a longer dungeon than the others, it's sometimes a good idea to stack your dungeoneering in such a way that you don't have to go in. But it is the strongest of all of them by a country mile. The first part of it, the secret entrance, lets you get a basic land card. Then you can either scry 2 or get 1/1 counters. I'll almost always take the scry 2. Then you can make a treasure token or go to creature. Then you can either draw a card or get a 4/1 black skeleton token. And then you get to look at the top 10 cards of your library, put a creature from among them onto the battlefield with 3/1/1 counters, and it gains hexproof until your next turn. That's a monster of an effect with some of the stuff we have in this deck. So that is the basic idea behind the deck. You're going to go through the dungeon a bunch. You're going to get all those incremental advantages, and you're going to just, through attrition, outpace everybody at the table while killing them with both a mix of combat and burn damage. Now, the $15 version of the deck that I built is able to do all of the exact same things that this deck can. So if you want a link to the $15 version of the deck, I'll have a link to that video in the description. Please go check that out. But if you want the full power version of the deck, then let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting with the scariest part of my version of the deck, the board wipe section. I run 6 board wipes in the full power version of this deck, starting with this boy, Nevinrial Urborg Tyrant. He's got hexproof from artifacts, creatures, and enchantments, and when he enters the battlefield, you make a 2/2 zombie for every creature that died this turn, and whenever he dies, you may pay 1 to blow up all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Now, this is a really cool effect considering that our commander Sefris says anytime we finish the dungeon, we get to res any creature from our graveyard. And I will go on record to say I think Sefris is the strongest reanimation commander of all of them. She is in the perfect colors to reanimate things and get lots and lots of value out of them. All the creatures that she has access to in her colors are just absolutely astounding, and the dungeon itself, being a draw engine on it in its own right, allows us to do all kinds of wacky things. Also, 2 of our dungeons let us cheat cards out of the deck, which is just, it's massive. It's a massive, massive ability to have on a commander. Sefris never survives more than a turn or 2 in the games that I play her, because people who have played against my Sefris deck understand when they sit down at the table with me what needs to happen. I need to be controlled. I need to be annihilated. Otherwise, bad things happen. But getting back to the board wipes, Cataclysmic Gearhulk. When it comes into the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, creature, enchantment, and a planeswalker, and sacrifices every other card on their board that is not a land, that is not one of the 4 cards they chose. So this can simplify a board state repeatedly, and because of the way our deck works, we don't care if we lose all of our stuff. Sefris is a deck that can board wipe itself into oblivion and not actually give a rat's ass about board wiping itself into oblivion. Speaking of which, Damn is a wonderful board wipe in this variant of the deck. It is a 2-mana single target removal spell that can also be overloaded and become a Wrath of God, where it blows up all the creatures on the board. Then Ondu Inversion is one of my favorite Magic the Gathering cards that has ever been printed. Ondu says you blow up all non-land permanents, and you do that for a very high cost of 8 mana, but this deck can ramp very, very quickly, so that's pretty fine. You can also use it as a land if you are in a position where you need to use a land instead of getting a board wipe. So like early in the game, if you are missing your land drops, just drop it as Ondu Sky Ruins. The deck has plenty of other board wipes. You don't need to rely on this being a spell in your hand. MDFCs are wonderful. In decks where I don't have to worry about budget, I always have MDFCs. Then we have Elish Norn Gran Cenobite. She is only a board wipe for little creatures, but she can do things that are insane for us. She is a static. All creatures on your opponent's board have -2/-2. All your creatures have +2/+2. So, if you, say, board wipe somebody and then get Nevinrial out, getting an army of zombies, and then you get Elish Norn out, which we can do for free for both of them in this deck, we can have an army of 4/4 zombies and just turn somebody into Swiss cheese with that army of zombies. Then we have Massacre Worm, another board wipe for little creatures, but it's got the extra effect of whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. This is one of our easy access win conditions because the deck will be making creatures die on our opponent's turns repeatedly over and over and over again, and just doing it at a very, very rapid rate. Just a very, very rapid rate. But let's go ahead and move into the next section here, the ramp section of the deck, starting with Arcane Signet. Add a mana of any color. Azorius Signet, Dimir Signet, and Orzhov Signet are all able to filter mana into the mana types that they have. Then I have Talisman of Dominance, Hierarchy, and Progress. They are basically pain lands that we can run for 2 mana. Oh, as another aside, the version of the deck I'm showing you right now is the version with the artworks that I use. That's the version that's $444. The full power Sefris deck that is not using my artworks is actually $336. I'll have a link to the full power Sefris build that just has the cards in general, because I know that specifically the artworks that I play is not super important to everybody else, but I want those artworks for the video, so I'm going to keep them. Then we have Felwar Stone, which can be any mana that our opponent's lands could produce. Then we have Solemn Simulacrum. It ETBs to get us a land from our deck onto the battlefield, and then if it dies, we can draw a card. Then, of course, a obligatory Soul Ring. While I may not be the biggest fan of this card, I do understand its purpose in a full power version of any deck. And it's the only bit of fast mana I'll allow myself if I have to. Then we have Wayfarer's Bauble, sack it to get any basic land from our deck and put it onto the battlefield. Then we have Pitiless Plunderer, which is the artwork I'm going to be getting as soon as the Fallout decks come out. Whenever another creature that we have dies, we make a treasure token. This is a piece of infinite mana we have access to that is ridiculously strong. But we'll get into some of the ways this deck abuses that kind of ability in a bit. Moving on to the next most important part of any deck you will ever see me build. This is the removal and interaction section, beginning with the offer you can't refuse that me and my girlfriend Saki got from the DreamHack convention here in Atlanta. 1 mana, counter any non-creature spell its controller makes 2 treasure tokens. So, we can use this on our opponent's cards, and it's a wonderful counter spell for our opponent's cards, but one of the reasons I love this is it is a flexible piece of ramp when we need it to be. And one of my favorite things about the Sefris deck is everything in it is flexible and can be used for multiple purposes. So, if we are missing multiple land drops, we can just play a garbage card and then immediately negate it with the offer you can't refuse to generate the treasures we need for an upcoming turn, if we are not in the process of being targeted where we feel like we need to use it to stop, like removal or something. Then we have Angel of the Ruins. It's in my $15 Sefris build and in the full power one. Plane cycling, which means we discard it to get a planes from our deck on into our hand. And then if it enters the battlefield, we can exile 2 target artifacts or enchantments. I made a player quit with this card at my LGS, literally last week, and I adore this card so much. And the reason I do is because not only is it a wonderful piece of removal in its ability to get rid of 2 problematic cards on a board, in my scenario, it was, oh, they both have mana crypts on the board. I'm going to go ahead and snipe them both. 2 mana crypts are going away immediately as soon as this comes out. But Sefris says anytime any creature enters the graveyard from anywhere that we control, or we own, rather, this ability triggers. The ability being we go into the dungeon, and, that gets us further and further into revive creatures, which, of course, means we can get Angel of the Ruins out very, very easy. We can just cycle it out to get a Plains-style card, which means a Shockland or a Tri-land or anything like that. We cycle it out to get that card. Sefris sees that and then throws us into the dungeon, and then we're never paying 7 for the card. We're just reanimating it with Sefris's ability. Angel of the Ruins is one of the most wonderful 15-cent cards I have ever put in a deck. Then we have Arcane Denial, counter any spell, and then me and the opponent will draw cards. Arcane Denial is wonderful because if you are just countering a spell to stop it, sometimes you run into the problem of, hey, I've created an enemy. Or an even worse problem, hey, me and the opponent are down 1 card, and that's cool, but there's 2 other people at the table who are not down a card. What do we do about that? Arcane Denial helps circumvent all of that. It feels less bad for the opponent, so you end up not making an immediate enemy, and you are not down a resource, so you still have the ability to contend with the other 2 people at the table. Speaking of a card that lets you contend with people at the table for a long time, Archon of Cruelty. My God, this man puts in work. Anytime it enters the battlefield or attacks, an opponent sacks a creature, discards a card, and loses 3 life. But that's not all. then you draw a card, and then you gain 3 life. If an Archon of Cruelty is allowed to sit on the board for more than a couple turns, it runs away with the game because it is a 6/6 flyer, meaning every time it swings, it is dealing at least 9 damage, split however you want, because you don't have to use its ability to target the player that you are swinging at. It is a phenomenal piece of removal. And then we have Demon's Disciple. ETB, every player has to sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker. Playcrafter does the same thing, but if a player cannot, they also have to discard a card. These are both wonderful pieces of sacrifice for the entire table. And of course, when you sack a creature, Sefris triggers, putting you in a very, very good spot. Then we have Ashen Rider, another just amazing creature that puts in stupid amounts of work. Anytime it enters the battlefield or dies, exile a permanent. This is one of those things that if people do not exile within the first, turn or two of it being on the board, it runs away with games. Having the ability to basically sack a card anytime you revive it to get rid of 2 cards, this is why Ashen Rider and Angel of the Ruins can run away with games very, very easy. Being able to remove 2 cards every time you reanimate something consistently and over again, you end up in a dominant position in the game very quickly. Then we have Cathar Commando, which we can, it's a 3/1 that can sack itself to blow up an artifact or enchantment, of course triggering our commander. Counter spell, it speaks for itself, it counters spells. Necron Deathmark, it comes into the board, it blows up any creature that a player has, and then somebody mills 3 cards. If somebody casts a Vampiric Tutor, cast this to fuck the Vampiric Tutor. If you know that the top of your deck is something that you want to throw into the graveyard for Sefris, or you just want to gamble on it, summon this on the opponent's turn, blow up a thing, mill 3 cards, trigger Sefris, reanimate another thing, go hog wild. Necron Deathmark is a fantastic removal piece, and if you don't have 5 in your collection, you are probably not very happy. I'm sorry. Necron Deathmark, it goes in so many decks. It goes in so many decks. Speaking of goes in so many decks, Meteor Golem, which I have been informed by my audience can have tits. So now I have Meteor Golem with tits in my deck. The Meteor Golems also came in pringled for her pleasure, so I have very, very pringly Meteor Golems I needed to 3D print an uncurling device to fix. But 7 mana, 3/3, blows up any non-land permanent and opponent controls. Of course, we're just going to be cheating this out with Sefris over and over again. It's a wonderful piece of removal. Run it in more decks. It solves so many problems. Please run it. It is good. Then we have Hagra Mauling. It costs 1 less if an opponent has no basic lands. Blow up any creature at all, and it is an MDFC, so we can flip it onto the backside to make it a land if we need. Then we have Ravenloft Adventurer. It comes into the battlefield, giving us the initiative, which of course is wonderful, but it also acts as a Dauthi Voidwalker, because every time a creature an opponent controls would die, exile that card, put a hit counter on it. If this attacks and you've completed a dungeon, make an opponent lose 1 life for every card they have with a hit counter on it. Most of the reason this is in here is to give us the initiative, but it also has the added benefit of exiling our opponent's stuff. So we get to be the Reanimator player that does all the cool things, and our opponents get to be the Reanimator players who don't get things at all. Then, of course, a Swords to Plowshare, but I've been debating on taking this out of the deck, actually. There's a part of me that wants to just take this and remove it and put instead a Generous Gift in the deck so that I have some more flexible removal in the deck, but this is a personal choice that you can make on your own. And then we have Wash Away, one of my favorite counter spells. It is a 3-mana counter spell normally, but we can also pay 1 mana to counter any spell that was not cast from an opponent's hand. So we get to stop any type of cascade effects. We get to stop any creatures from hitting the board that are commanders, because of course they are cast from the command zone. All of them get just screwed over by Wash Away. Wash Away is a fantastic card. Run it in more decks that are blue. Please, you will not be upset about that. But now we have to move into the 11-card draw package of the deck. And the thing is, this deck has an 11-card draw package, but the reality is everything in the deck is drawing cards for the most part. Archon of Cruelty draws cards. Every dungeon card draws cards. Reanimating things draws cards. We will always get tons of cards, but you'll notice a theme with the draw engine as we go through. Starting with Bolas' Citadel. I count this as a draw spell because realistically it's doing all the things a draw spell normally would do. It's giving us all kinds of advantage. It's a secondary win con as well, but We can look at the top card of our library at any time. We may play lands and cast spells from the top of the library. If we cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value, rather than paying its mana cost to play it, which we have lots of ways to get life in the deck because of the dungeon, so we're fine with that. We can then sacrifice 10 non-land permanents to make every player lose 10 life except ourselves. So this is an alternate win con when we need it to be one. Most of the time, though, this is just going to get 2 or 3 cards onto the board really quickly and steamroll us ahead of our opponents. Now, Bowls of Citadel, your playgroup may not be a huge fan of it. I run it because I am running this deck tutorless. If you look at my deck list in full, you'll notice I've removed every tutor from it, and that's because I go through this weird cycle with Sefris where I put tutors back in, realize that they give me all the infinite combos in the world, and take those tutors back out, and I bounce back and forth on them. I'm currently in a position of not running tutors. So, then we have Fact or Fiction. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent puts those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile in your hand on the other end of the graveyard. If a creature goes into the graveyard this way, it triggers Sefris. That's why it's in here. Speaking of which, Faithful Mending lets us draw 2 life and gain 2 cards. I can't speak. Draw 2 cards and gain 2 life and then discard 2 cards, and it's got a flashback cost, so we can do it twice. Faithful Mending is another way to just get creatures from our hand into the graveyard. Also, Negotiations. This is just Black or Fiction, which sounds like a porn website, but no, it's not. So, Hostile Negotiation says exile the top 3 cards of your library into a face-down pile, and then another 3 into a face-down pile. Look at both, then throw 1 pile to an opponent face-up, and then hand them the face-down pile. They can't look at the face-down pile. Ask them if they want to go through door number 1 or 2, and if they choose whichever one they choose, you get to keep, and then the other door they throw away. I like putting the less powerful stack, or usually the more powerful stack. I like putting the more powerful stack as the one I show them, so that they're usually like, if you're showing me you've got all this, what the hell's in the other stack? And it makes people fun. It's a funny situation. The reality is both doors are always bad doors to go through with this card, because the way Sefris works, we're gonna get whatever we throw away. I've handed people a stack of cards that had a bunch of reanimate spells, and another stack of cards that was the face up stack that had a meteor golem, and they were like, you're showing me the meteor golem and I know who you are. Why are you showing me that you're going to get the meteor golem? Are you going to start looping him? And the answer is yes. And no matter how you stop him, I am going to be looping the meteor golem. But next we have Muldrifter, the best artwork from Muldrifter. The just chef's kiss artwork of Muldrifter. ETB, draw 2 cards. We can pay 3 mana to evoke it so it auto dies, triggering Sefris. Then we have Merfolk Looter, tap it to draw a card and discard a card. Matsulanti the Great Door, tap it to draw a card and discard a card. And then we can flip it with 4 mana to get the Core. Add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of permanents in our graveyard. This is a wonderful hyper ramp piece we have access to later in the game. Then we have Likeness Looter, draw a card, discard a card. A lot of cards do this in this deck. But we can also pay X to make it become a copy of any card in our graveyard with mana value X, and then give it flying as well. Use this to make a copy of Sun Titan. Use this to make it a copy of Archon Cruelty. Use this to make it a copy of any of our stuff that has really broken attack triggers. Then we have Sauron's Ransom. Choose an opponent. They look at the top 4 cards of our library, separate them into a face down and face up pile, put 1 into our hand and the other into the graveyard. It is a weak version of Fact or Fiction that costs just 1 mana less. I am so glad this card is less expensive now. So when Sauron's Ransom came out, this card was like $8 to $10, and now it's 47 cents. I'm glad that its price has gone down, because I do not like paying $10 for a Fact or Fiction. Then we have Skullclamp. Equip it to a creature. If it dies, draw 2 cards. We can put it on creatures and give them +1/-1 as well. So the reason this is in here is, 1, we're sacking our creatures a lot, so we're drawing cards a lot. But the reason you usually use a Skullclamp is because you have tokens you are generating and you can sack them with Skullclamp. Well, it does turn out that if we go into the Lost Mines of Fendelver, we can create a 1/1 red goblin creature token in the mines. Or if we go to the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, we can make 2 1/1 skeletons. In either of these scenarios, we are making plenty of fodder for our Skullclamp. So it's going to draw us tons of cards. It's really, really mana efficient. People have to kill it very, very early, or we get to run away with a big hand. Speaking of big hands, Windfall. Every player discards their hand and then draws cards equal to the cards discarded this way, which, of course, we don't care how many cards are in anybody's hands. We just want to discard cards for Sefris to trigger and get us further into the dungeon. That's all we care about. But, speaking of that dungeon, we have a dedicated dungeon section, starting with Acerec, the Arch Lich. When it enters the battlefield, if you haven't completed the Tomb of Annihilation, put it back into your hand. But you venture into the dungeon anytime you play it and you do that ability. It's got an attack trigger ability that it can deal with. Don't even worry about that. You don't really need to worry about that effect at all. Most of the time, if you're getting that effect, it's probably because Likeness Looter is cloning it, let's be honest. But Acerec, this is here so that we can say, hey, I have a lot of mana I need to dump on something. I'm going to cast Acerec like 15 times. Probably not that many, but you get the idea. Cast it a bunch, and then reanimate for however much mana you're sinking into it. Then we have Nadar, ETB, go into the dungeon. It's also got Vigilance. It also gives all of our creatures 1/1 if we've gone into the dungeon. All the tokens we've generated throughout the game can get a big boost from this. This can be our thing that can break parity if we need it to. Then we have Radiant Solar, the most busted thing Wizards has produced. Radiant Solar says anytime a creature that is a non-token ETBs, go into the dungeon. This is part of an infinite combo. This is part of many infinite combos. This is a stupid card. Wizards should not have printed this card. This deck would be equally powerful with or without this card, but with this card, we accidentally trip, stumble, and break our noses into infinite combos, of which I will show you. Then we have the White Plume Adventurer. When it enters the battlefield, take the initiative. At the beginning of our upkeep, untap any creature we control, but if we have the initiative, untap all the creatures we control instead. This has wonderful synergy with stuff like Merfolk Looter and Likeness Looter, while also letting us keep our blockers like Archon of Cruelty after they have swung at our opponents. White Plume Adventurer is a wonderful card. It is a Seedborn Muse lookalike that we get to put in a deck for $1.57, and it gives us the initiative, which is just a bonkers-ass strong mechanic. Speaking of bonkers-ass strong mechanics like initiative, Tomb of Horrors Adventurer and our copies package. Tomb of Horrors Adventurer gives us the initiative when it comes onto the battlefield, and anytime we cast our second spell, copy it. But if we have copied a spell already, copy it twice. So we get 3 copies of it. So here's one of the reasons why this thing is busted. Let's say you finished a dungeon and you have Tomb of Horrors Adventurer on the board. And then your second spell you cast is Radiant Solar. Now you have 1, 2, 3 Radiant Solars. Now every time you play a creature, you get to go into the dungeon. Let's say that you also drop a clone onto that Radiant Solar, probably brought in from the graveyard because you reanimated it, all right? Phantasmal Image is here. I'll talk about it in a second, but now you've got 4 Radiant Solars. You know the cool thing about Radiant Solar? If you have 4 on the board, every time you reanimate a creature once, you reanimate your entire graveyard if Sefris is on the board. This is because reanimating a single creature will make you go into the Lost Mines of Phandelver. You go, hey, 1 creature has entered my battlefield and 4 Radiant Solars saw it. I'm going to go into the dungeon 1, 2, 3, 4 times. That's going to reanimate a creature in my graveyard because that is what Sefris says that I should be doing. I guess I'm going to get a creature from the graveyard again, and again, and again, and again, until there's nothing left in my graveyard. This type of interaction vomits out everything we've ever played from the beginning of the game till now. And of course, everything we've thrown away with things like discarding. Tomb of Horrors Adventurer is a nutty card, and it is so powerful. Any deck that I can put it in, I have shoved it in. I have put it into Leviathans. I have put it into Elf Tribal. I have put it into this dungeon deck. I have put it into my Eldrazi deck. Tomb of Horrors Adventurer is such a ridiculously powerful card. It will run games into the ground. Do you know how stupid it is to go, hey, I have Tomb of Horrors Adventurer out. I'm going to go ahead and cast something really, really small, really silly, really, really nifty. Can you handle Archon of Cruelty times 3? Can you handle 3 Plague Crafters? Everybody sacking 3 creatures at once? Can you handle all 3 copies of my Ashen Rider coming out right now? And then I'm going to sack them all so that I blow up 6 cards? Can you handle that? The chances are you probably can't. So, Tomb of Horrors Adventure is doing a fuckload of work for being a 13-cent card. Magic is budget, everybody. Then we have Phantasmal Image. It's a 2-mana clone, comes into battle as a copy of any creature, except it's an illusion. If that creature gets targeted by any spell, sacrifice it. So, this card has only counter synergy with one card we have, which is Malakir Rebirth, but it has a lot of synergy with everything else. Being a clone for 2 mana is one of the most powerful things you can be, especially with our deck. Oftentimes, you'll find that it's a good idea to play Sefris, and then play Phantasmal Image on top of Sefris, killing the Phantasmal Image, and starting a dungeon run. Oftentimes, you'll find that's a really funny ability. Phantasmal Image also goes really well with some of the cards we'll talk about later. Then we have Mirror Image. We can have it come as a copy of any creature on the board for 3 mana. It's just the next best thing to Phantasmal Image, and the artwork is so good. Look at it. Look, they have white hair, and I have a weakness, okay? Then we have Glasspool Mimic. It is a MDSC. It is a land that also doubles as a 3-mana clone. It is just absolutely wonderful. I never feel bad about having this in an opening hand. Whether it has to be a land, whether it has to be a clone, doesn't matter. I am never upset about what this card is doing in any particular game that I am in. But now we got to talk about the most broken part of the deck. You saw how Sefris reanimates cards really, really easy, and every single card we have that draws cards also throws them into the graveyard. What if I told you that we also had 10 other ways of reanimating? 10. So, starting with one of my favorites, Altar of Baal. The only bit of relevant text on here is that we can pay 2 mana, put it on the board, then pay 3 mana, and reanimate any creature from our graveyard at sorcery speed by exiling any creature we have. Exile an Ashen Rider to trigger it, or exile a token you've spawned with your billions of ways of getting 1 or 2 one-off tokens. It does lots of work. Then we have Animate Dead, which can animate a creature from the grave and give it -1, -0. Otherwise, it's just premature burial from Yu-Gi-Oh! Karmic Guide can reanimate a creature from the grave as well, and then it will kill itself to its own ability. You'll notice a theme here that every single reanimate spell we have, for the most part, is a permanent of some variety. That will be relevant. Then we have Malakir Rebirth. We can choose a creature, and then if it dies, we just let it come right back. Do this on something like Nevinral, because then Nevinral will die, kill everybody's boards, come right back, and then summon a billion 2/2 zombies because you sneezed on it. Then we have Sister Hospitaller. When it comes into the battlefield, reanimate anything from your grave and gain life equal to its mana value. Then we have Reanimate, a 1-mana reanimate spell. Put a creature from your graveyard into the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its mana value. One of my favorite plays with this card is to have a turn 2 Merfolk Looter and then throw away Archon of Cruelty, and then just cast Reanimate and have a turn 3 Archon of Cruelty, getting an immediate bit of advantage, usually killing a commander the minute that we've done so, because we are at turn 3. Most commanders have either popped on the board, or the pieces they need to get the commanders on the board have been played. You can also use this to kill a mana dork. It's funny, but that puts you really far ahead. And if nobody's got the removal to kill Archon, you're running away with the game. And if they do have the removal to kill Archon, they are sacrificing turns 1 through 4 to do it, which is a really awful thing to feel like you have to do, is to lose your early game tempo to stop somebody from just cracking you in the noggin for 9 every turn for having the audacity to breathe. Then we have Tortured Existence. This thing's stupid. Pay a mana to put it on the board, and then we can pay any mana to discard a creature and return any creature from our graveyard to our hand. Here's what we're doing with this. We don't care what creature we're throwing away. Let's just say we got Angel of the Ruins in our hand, right? Turn 1, play this. Turn 2 or 3, get Sefris out. Then just yeet Angel of the Ruins or Archon of Cruelty, Demon's Disciple, doesn't matter. Yeet a creature to the graveyard. Sefris triggers. Then your opponent's turn starts. Yeet a creature to the graveyard, and just keep cycling the same 2 creatures between each other, and every turn cycle you'll get a free reanimate off of this. It looks like its primary function is to get you important cards back from your graveyard that you need, but no, the true power of this card is being able to just cycle creatures over and over again. So Sefris goes, I saw that. And then you get tons of reanimates. Then we have Phyrexian Reclamation, a 1 mana enchantment that allows us to pay 2 and 2 life to get any creature from our graveyard to our hand. This is the actual card that's getting things back to our hand. This is the card that looks like it's doing that, and it's actually a reanimation spell in disguise. Then we have Sun Titan. When it ETBs or attacks, get a permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And one of the best permanents to get with that is Necromancy. You may cast it as though it had flash. If you cast it anytime a sorcery couldn't have been cast, then the controller of the permanent sacrifices it at the beginning of the next cleanup step. When it ETBs, if it's on the battlefield, it becomes an aura with enchant creature. It's Animate Dead. It's Animate Dead that if we cast it at flash speed, it kills itself very, very quickly. So one of my favorite things to do with this, and this is what I did in the tournament to be such a problem. I threw Angel of Ruins into the graveyard. I got Sun Titan out. I used Necromancy to get the Angel of the Ruins out on turn 4 or 5 because I got the Sun Titan out with Sefris. And then I sacrificed Angel of the Ruins to an altar, getting rid of the Necromancy, and then I swung the Sun Titan in, getting back to the Necromancy, summoning the Angel of the Ruins again, and going, this is not an infinite loop, but I can do this as many times as I want. Most of your mana is coming from artifacts because your deck is $2,000. Your deck is now Swiss cheese. Have fun. I adore Sun Titan. I adore Necromancy, and this card does so much work. Necromancy and Animate Dead power up Sun Titan to the 9s. It is so fun. I need to get a good artwork of Sun Titan. This card does lots and lots of work. Then we have, of course, I mentioned altars. These are the sack outlets of the deck. There are 4 of them. Viscera Seer, sack a creature to scry 1. Phyrexian Altar, sack a creature to get a mana. Ashnod's Altar, sack a creature to get 2 mana that's colorless. And Altar of Dementia, sack a creature. Target player mills cards equal to the creature's power. Altar of Dementia allows us to have an alternate win con. We can do infinite mill. If somebody's not running an Eldrazi Titan, we infinitely mill their deck and they die. You probably need me to demonstrate the loop real quick, so I will go ahead and do that as we speak. So this is a convoluted infinite combo, and there's a few ways it can initiate, but it is one of the funniest things in the world to do when you do it. So you have Sefris out, right? Sefris is on the board, and Sefris sees her good buddy, Radiant Solar. Radiant Solar is out here and says, yeah, when creatures ETB, I'm gonna reanimate a thing. You're like, okay, cool. That's fine. I have a sack outlet of some variety. Viscera Seer, Phyrexian Altar, Ashnod's Altar, Altar Dementia, doesn't matter. Any of these are on the board. Now, if our graveyard is properly set up, which we can do with a single card in a stronger version of this deck that runs Buried Alive. I've taken Buried Alive out of my deck because I don't like winning with tutors. But in the world where we have Buried Alive, we throw away the Sun Titan and the Karmic Guide and one more card. Well, yeah, one more card. And that card is Nadar, because when Nadar enters the battlefield, we go into the dungeon. So, remember the way the dungeon works. If we can go into each of these at least once, then we get a reanimate. We need 4 reanimates for the dungeon to trigger. So, in the world where we have this combo, we have Karmic Guide, Sun Titan, and then, of course, the Nadar in the graveyard. Sefris will reanimate Karmic Guide. Karmic Guide will reanimate Sun Titan. Sun Titan will reanimate Nadar. That's 3 creatures entering the battlefield. Radiant Solar sees all 3 of them. You go into the dungeon 3 times. Nadar goes into the dungeon on his own, causing us to go into the dungeon 4 times, which would reanimate 1 more creature. But because the way these abilities stack on top of one another, we have the ability to respond to our own dungeon trigger with something like Viscera Seer. Sacking those 3 creatures I named, throwing them into the graveyard, and now they are valid targets for Sefris, so that we can do that over and over again. Now, option 1 for winning the game is just going through the Lost Mines of Fendelver infinitely. Each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. But let's say that you've got a player who's playing an infinite life deck, and they've done their thing. You can't kill them that way, so you're going to use Altar of Dementia to mill them out completely instead. getting rid of all of their shenanigans. If that does not work, if somehow they are a life gain deck that also has the Eldrazi Titans, then instead you are going to have to go with the brute force approach, which is clear their board completely, never let them have cards anymore, and smack them in the noggin with Sefris. I have had to do this at least once. It is a painful process, but they chose to have a deck that was that resilient, so they chose to be in a game that was that long. That's my personal opinion on that. But that is the crux of the deck, except for one more section, the Protect section. Lightning Greaves gives our commander Shroud at a whopping cost of 0 mana, which is great. It also lets us do things like throw it onto Arcana Cruelty to get a very quick swing in the minute it touches the board. And then we have one of my favorite cards, Guardian of Faith. When it enters the battlefield, phase out any number of other creatures we control, and then they come back later because that's how phasing works. I love Guardian of Faith because it is a creature we can sacrifice to Sefris later in the game, and it also is just a budget Teferi's Protection. I actually prefer this over Teferi's Protection in the deck because being a creature, it is more on theme, and when we do things like mill it out, then we actually feel really good about getting that creature in the graveyard. Also, it's an ETB trigger, so there is an option we have with our instant speed reanimations by using things like Tortured Existence to just go, oh, you're going to do something like a board wipe. I don't want that to happen. I'm just going to discard a card from my hand, triggering Sefris, reanimating Guardian of Faith. My entire board phases out. You can get bent, fuck off, and I will be back in a turn. And we can do that over and over again because unlike Teferi's Protection, he is a creature. But now that the protection section of the deck is out of the way, we need to move on to the land base. And again, this is where most of the money of the deck is, because this is not a budget version of the deck. This is my personal baby. So I run 2 of each of the core 21 foil lands. I adore these things. They didn't go to a lot of people because that happened. It just so happened that COVID happened when these lands were being given out to LGSs. So a lot of people didn't get them. So as far as I'm concerned, these COVID lands, these are just COVID lands to me. Then we have Morphic Pool, Sea of Clouds, and Vault of Champions. These are all Battle Bond lands. I need to get the full art versions of Morphic Pool and Sea of Clouds, but otherwise these are great. Then I have 3 fetching lands in the deck. I could run more, but honestly, the deck doesn't need too many more than that. You would prefer to run more expensive fetching lands in the deck, but I do not have that kind of money, and these are basically carryovers from when I took apart my Modern Bogles deck, and I had these fetch lands available, so these are the ones that I run. But if you are running the deck, then it would be better to run the 3 that are in the colors of Sefris. Probably after Modern Horizons 3 reprints them, maybe I'll go ahead and swap them out into the deck. Then I have the 3 flip lands in the deck because they are pretty. They're very, very pretty. I adore flip lands. Then we have 3 Omni lands, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, and Rafine's Tower because it is a searchable land. 3 Pain lands because these artworks are just gorgeous. And then 3 shock lands because they can be grabbed with the fetch lands themselves, and I adore the retro border ones that came out in Ravnica Remastered. And then we have slow lands. I still need to get a full art Deserted Beach. If you are a person who plays at my LGS and are somehow watching my videos, I am looking for a full art Deserted Beach, and I am willing to trade. But anywho, that is the deck itself. I've gone into one of the main infinite combos. There's a bunch of other silly things you can do, like Tomb of Horrors Adventurer says you take the initiative when it comes into the battlefield. When you cast your second spell each turn, copy it. So a funny thing you can do with Tomb of Horrors Adventurer, your second spell is Phantasmal Image or Mirror Image or Glasspool Mimic, creating copies of Tomb of Horrors Adventurer because for some reason he ain't legendary. And now we have a bunch of them, and then we can get like 8 to 9 Radiant Solars out, but each of these Tomb of Horrors Adventurers goes into the initiative when we play them, so we get a free reanimate when we do that. It's just so nutty. If you have like 3 or 4 Tomb of Horrors Adventurers on the board because of the copying mechanic, being able to go, hey, I cast my second spell this turn, it's copied 8 times. I hope that's okay. Is it okay that I copied the spell 8 times? Are you okay that I have 8 copies of, or 9 copies because of the way the copy works? Are you okay with 9 Radiant Solars? Are you okay with 9 Massacre Worms? Everybody's things die and everybody burns for 10 damage? No, 18 damage per Massacre Worm? Are you all okay with that? Is that an alright thing to do? Are you okay with my clone coming in as a copy of Nevinral to auto-activate his destruction ability? Are you okay with that? Are you okay with 9 copies of Muldrifter? Because I am! I love this deck. I love it so much. It is just a fantastic time. If you have not played Dungeons, please, I beg of you, I implore you, Sefris is a good time. Start with the $15 version of the deck that I built. I literally have a paper copy of that in my bag, and I have played it in the tournament at my LGS to basically the exact same effect as my main Sefris deck. I had somebody say that they're a budget player, they didn't like being targeted for playing Prosper. I tried to communicate that, like, Prosper's a known problem commander, especially in our area. So, like, it makes sense they're going to get targeted. Just accept you're going to get targeted and play around it. And they didn't accept that because they said they were a budget player, so I pulled out the $15 Sefris deck and said, okay, what's the budget of your deck? Oh, cool. The budget of your deck is $45 because it's a modified precon. That's cool. Here's my Sefris deck. The budget is $15. I even showed him the Mox Field list and went, here is the entirety of the list. You have access to everything I'm playing. Nothing that I'm doing in this deck is outside the realm of what you can see here. There will be no surprises. Let's play. Proceeded to control the entire board for the entire game, and I'm not saying that as a brag. I'm saying that so that you, who has not tried Dungeons yet and has not tried reanimating with Sefris yet, can go and try that out. It's such a fun time. It's such a fun time. Please go play Sefris. Please. Even if it's just the $15 version, just go play Sefris. Even if you just, like, find the precon somewhere out in the wild for Sefris, and you just, like, modify it with a couple of cards, like altars or something. Don't care. Go play it. Good, fun deck. You're going... If you've fallen out of love with Magic, Sefris will make you fall back in love with Magic. Maybe not that far, but I just said... Look, this is the commander. This is one of the 2 commanders that made me enjoy Commander. I hated the Commander format because I was a Standard and Modern player. Pioneer hadn't caught on yet, so I wasn't playing that at the time, but I played Affinity and Bogles in Modern at the time, and I had been playing an Orzhov control deck in Standard when we had Paper Standard at our area, and that was the stuff that I enjoyed. That was the stuff that I wanted to practice. That was the stuff I wanted to grind. I had no interest in Commander at all. Sefris and one other deck, which I will talk about in another video, are the decks that brought me into Commander and made me stay. So, if this seemed like a gushy video, if this seemed like a love letter to just a commander that none of y'all care about as much as me, that's fine. That was the point. Entirely the point. $444 for the version of the deck in the exact printings that I use, and $336 for the full power version of the deck, with whichever versions are cheapest for the cards. Most of that money is in the mana base, and honestly, you could build a $50 version of this deck that would be just as powerful as what I'm using, because most everything in this deck is just... It's expensive because it's expensive, not expensive because it's powerful. The $50 version of the deck can run things like Massacre Worm now. It can easily run Dam, Ondu Inversion, Nevinral. Elish Norn is taking up a decent bit of the budget slot. Like, Glasspool Mimic you could trade out if you really needed to. Nothing in the dungeon section is expensive at all. Nothing in the draw section is really that expensive, with exception to the Skullclamp itself and the Bolus's Citadel. In the protection section, I mean, Guardian of Faith is a $4 card, but you could... I would rather run the Guardian of Faith more than the Boldest Citadel because of the ways that it interacts with the game. Pitiless Plunderer, you don't even need in the deck. It's getting a reprint, its price is going to go down. But you don't even need it in the deck, honestly. As far as the reanimation section, I mean, everything in here is cheap, with the exception of the reanimate itself, and you can just trade out the reanimate for any other card. I was using Dread Return before I got Reanimate, because it had the ability to trigger Sefris with its sack ability. So you could do that as well. The removal and interaction section, I would keep exactly the same, with the exception of probably trade out Swords of Plowshare for like a generous gift. Arcana Cruelty, I would keep in even the $50 version of the deck. I would sacrifice 1/5 of that deck's price point just to be able to run Arcana Cruelty. As far as the sack outlets go, you don't need the altars. You really don't. I very rarely ever use them for their actual abilities. They are almost always just sack outlets. So just like, before I had these, I was running a Woe Strider and a Spawning Pit and a Vampiric Rites. And those will do literally just as well as these do. I'm running those ones because I have them, and they are a personal preference. And the land base, you could literally just keep the land base that's in the $15 version of the Sefris build. Again, I have taken that deck into tournaments and performed perfectly fine with it as it is. So you don't even have to change that land base that much, but if you've got better lands lying around than what I have in that deck, like trading out the Thriving Lands, for example, then you can go that route. Anyway, this video is almost an hour long of me just gushing over my favorite commander, and that's probably what I'm going to name the video when it's out. It's going to be out very soon after me saying this. So I do want to say very quickly, thank you for everybody who's gotten the channel to 3,000 subscribers. We finally got there, and I am looking forward to the next milestone of 5,000. I'm hoping we get there soon. It's looking like it'll be about 2 months, and I am just thrilled that y'all have enjoyed the decks and the channel so far. This has been a breath of fresh air as a creative outlet for me, and I'm very, very thankful to be able to do this. So thank you all very much for watching. I appreciate it. For those of you who have become channel members, y'all get videos the minute that I finish them, as opposed to the minute that they normally upload. Videos normally upload every day at 8 a.m. Eastern, but if you're a channel member, you get access to those videos the second that they are done being edited. So if you are a member, thank you so much for being a part of helping me grow this channel. If you are on Patreon, I'm also releasing videos for early access over there as well. So for anybody who's over either on the Patreon or channel member, thank you very much for helping me get as far as I have with this channel so far. And I'm just excited to see how far this goes. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let me know what changes you would make. If you've got stories with this kind of deck, if you build either this or the $15 version of the deck and you want to share how it performed, let me know down there. Just have fun with it. As always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here. They would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.